Greetings. My name is Dr. Lewis Andre Brownlee. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to present today about something that I'm very passionate about. So today we're going to be talking about critical multicultural education in STEAM. Many of us are familiar with multicultural education, but I want to introduce this idea of critical multicultural education in STEAM. My name is Dr. Lewis Andre Brownlee. I am a adjunct professor at Australia Mountain Community College. I'm also an advisor for computer and information technology and applied technology for students that are pursuing associate's applied science certificates and associate's in science and computer science degrees. And many of my students often transfer to either ASU, U of A, NAU, or GCU. And a large portion of them also go into the field with their associate's applied science degrees. And so what I'm speaking about today is something that I witnessed in my pathway within STEM about not seeing myself in the curriculum. And then when I got into the workplace, dealing with discriminatory practices as far as inequitable pay, promotion, hitting glass ceilings, and things of that nature. So I want to share something that I'm not just, speaking about theoretically, but something that is pragmatic. So critical multicultural education in STEAM. So critical multicultural education in STEAM pretty much focus on, equipping educators, advisors, and employers with methods, to help them facilitate learning among underrepresented groups, but also considering the STEM workforce. I think a lot of times within the classrooms, we often talk about heroes and sheroes and things of that nature that look like our students, but we rarely talk about the pipeline into the workforce where students often face discrimination outside of the P20, right? From the time they're born to the higher education and when they go into the field. So I feel like training in critical multicultural education could strengthen the capacity of educators. Educators meaning more than just teachers. Within a collegiate format, it will be student affairs and academic affairs. Within a high school format, it could be counselors, administrators, so on and so forth. So what I would like to do is encourage people to look at critical multicultural education as a framework and a schema to do three things primarily. And this one, to create a sense of belonging in their classes, challenge the stereotypes, hyperbolic language, and tropes surrounding non-whites and women in the curriculum, and help challenge discriminatory practices in the industry, such as inequitable pay and unjust hiring practice. And these are things I experienced personally as a Black male within STEM or STEAM. I can recall going through my studies at Clayton State University, there weren't many people in the industry that looked like me. And then when I worked as a mechanical engineer, there weren't many people in the field that looked like me as well. And so that led to some challenges, right? So, all right, so let's look at some data. I like to start things off with data because as they say, men lie, women lie, but numbers don't. And so let's look at some data. Here, we're looking at some data from the Pew Research. And the data, if I can move this around, the data is telling us something that's there, because what I like about this data that the Pew Research is offering is that they're actually interviewing employees. So it's a qualitative format. So it says amongst them employees, poor education and less encouragement top the list of major reasons why so few Blacks and Hispanics work in the field. And so they give these 7 examples, but I highlighted 3. And one of them is not encouraged to pursue these subjects from an early age. The next one is less likely to think they would succeed in these fields, and lack of Black and Hispanic roles in these fields, right? And so these things popped out at me when I looked at the data, because I'm like, yeah, I was never encouraged to pursue a STEM career at an early age. That's when it wasn't even an option. I was less likely to think that this was even a career option for me, because the narrative that I constantly heard when I was in school, that Asians were good at math and science, and I was looked more or less as an athlete, and I wasn't viewed as intelligent. And the other categories say blacks in STEM, more likely to say discrimination is a major reason why blacks, Hispanics are underrepresented in these jobs. And once again, I highlighted these two because they kind of jumped out at me. Face discrimination in the recruitment process, hiring and promotions, but these two, kind of jumped out at me. It was not encouraged to pursue these subjects from an early age and less likely to have access to quality education. Under the 10th Amendment, we all have access to education, but do we have access to quality education? And a lot of times this quality education is tied to funding, which education is funded through bond taxes, property taxes, right? So the more expensive the homes, the more property taxes you have, and the greater the school, or the better the school would be as far as offering resources like, advanced placement courses, honor courses, extracurricular activities, tutoring, and things of that nature. So these things popped at me because I, not as just a statistician, but also just a person who worked in engineering for almost 8 years, I can testify, to this of going into job interviews, and the moment that they see that I'm a certain hue, right, they either lowball me as far as the salary they want to give me, or they just decide to go a different route. All right, and so I took this data and I put it all on the same PowerPoint slide so we can kind of condense it to look at the impact. So amongst them employees, poor education and less encouragement, top list of major reasons why so few blacks and Hispanics work in the field. So less likely to have access to quality education and prepare them for fields, 52% black. All these are where black people think. Not encouraged to pursue, I'm sorry, this is the average. 52% not encouraged to pursue these subjects from an early age, 45%. Black and black of Hispanic role models in these fields is 32%. So these are astronomical numbers. These are not like small, minute numbers, right? We're talking about people. So out of 100 people, that's 52 people. That's over half. Out of 100 people, that's 32. That's like a third. So blacks in STEM are more likely to say discrimination is a major reason why blacks and Hispanics are unrepresented in these jobs. So I took the data from the previous slide and put it here, and it says not encouraged to pursue these subjects from an early age. White, 44%, black, 67%, Hispanics, 48%, and Asian, 38%. What I would love to see is this was possible, is to look at the data actually through class, right? Socioeconomic status, because it's common sense to think that the number one predictor of somebody being successful in school is what class they come from. And when you compound gender and race and all these other intersectionalities, they definitely make a major impact. Less likely to have access to quality education to prepare them for these fields. Whites, 50%, blacks, 73%, Hispanics, 53%, Asians, 52%. So as we can see, when people align themselves to colorblind perspectives, when they say, well, I don't see color. When you don't see color, then you don't see patterns, right? It doesn't mean if you agree or don't agree, but you don't see the patterns that are there, right? That impact students on a day-to-day basis on a structural and institutional level. So what I'm going to do is kind of just do a brief synopsis of what we call the hidden curriculum. The hidden curriculum is the curriculum that's there, that speaks to you covertly and subjectively. And when you don't see yourselves, you naturally over time, especially as children, believe that you can't do these things. Recently, I was in a meeting with a principal at a school in Mesa, and she was telling me how her 12-year-old black male students weren't doing so well. And she asked me, what's the solution? I said, have you heard the term, if you can see it, you can be it? She says, yes. I says, it's a reason why African-American males typically around that age want to be, athletes and entertainers, because that's often what they see through media outlets. Because I was in the same place. I didn't see myself as a scholar at all. I saw myself as just an athlete or laborer. I said, if you got some black male attorneys, dentists, professionals of sorts, educators, and place them in front of those students and build relationships and rapport, I guarantee you those students will change within a semester. And so we're going to be working together doing that. And so if you can see it, you can be it. So When we look, when I did a general search, I just typed in famous scientists, engineer, famous scientists, and I click images, and it said images. So if I'm a black male and I see this, I don't see myself nowhere in this. And this is only telling a slither of the history of science. Science originated in, the Rift Valley in Africa, where the human civilization started. So we can say science actually originated on the continent of Africa, and even can pinpoint it to certain places where calendars were created, language was created, natural philosophy or science, in a sense. These things were created, astrology, things of that nature. But if I'm a black male and I type in, famous scientists, and I see all of these Europeans, what is the message being sent to me? And I know when I taught engineering at Metro Tech High School, I did it for about 5 years. It always started in Greece and Rome, but I always made sure that we went further back to include the Ur of the Chaldeans, the Egyptians, the Hittites, and talk about their success, the Babylonians, and also make sure I included the Mayans, the Aztec, and the Incas, and also Native American nations such as those in the Mississippi Delta. They created those huge mounds. They were scientists as well. So when we look at this, we see one particular group. We see a homogeneity of representation here, right? And so we got to like reimagine what it is, what a scientist is. I thought my mom was a scientist for some of the things she used to do on a budget within our household. But what we see here is that there's a galvanization of one particular group and the exclusion of another group. All right. I was online typing in technology, trying to find something similar to the scientist's previous slide. And I found these inventors card games. And I found it interesting. I highlighted in blue, it says on each card is an illustration of inventor with his name, where he came from, and when he lived. They are they are totally being, explicit about their exclusionary practices, right? They're looking at males. They're not looking at any women at all. And so when we look at technology, it could be many different things. It could be, construction, transportation, energy, power, communication, manufacturers, and bio-related. So you mean to tell me there are no women at all that did anything of this nature? And that's not true. It's not true at all. And so like I can think of one right off the top of my head named Madam C.J. Walker, who revolutionized the beauty and hair care industry, not for just African-American women, but for just women in general. When I typed in E, for famous engineers, this is what pops up. Once again, it kind of looks similar to the famous scientists, but they do have a woman that's represented here. They do have an African-American lady represented, but I did highlight this in the left-hand corner, right? Because whoever created the student blog did a great job of diversity. They have Leonardo da Vinci, Jimmy Carter, Lonnie Johnson, Thomas Edison, Ellen Ochoa, Steve Nye, the science guy. They have a large diversity of what it is to be engineering. But if you take that out and just kind of focus what you have, once again, it's this condensation, right, of a certain particular group of people. And so what is the message that's being sent to our students when they see this? And as educators being critical, we have to critique this and explain why, and then offer a different solution. So the A is for art, and I didn't know a good way to explain what art is, because art is often defined by the viewer, and it means different things for different people. One of my favorite artists is Jean-Michel Basquiat. I love his work, but some people critique his work, and so I found this video clip what I would love to play that kind of explains what art is.
Art. When we hear that word, some of our minds jump to museums or framed paintings, and in that context, some people think, nah, I'm not a big fan of art, I just don't get it. or they think of art as something that's just for intellectuals or artsy people. But really, art is for anyone who wants to experience it, and it's often in more places than we might realize. Songs you like, movies you watch, poems, theater, even a quilt that your grandmother made. All of that and more is art. So you might be wondering, well, then what is art? How do I define it? Well, that's tough. Art's been around for thousands of years, and through the ages it's evolved in a number of different ways. And the reasons for creating it vary from person to person depending on any number of factors. So defining art is pretty tricky, and it's something that's been debated throughout history. There just isn't one agreed upon definition. However, many believe that art is anything that stirs emotion in you. Now, the emotions that get stirred up depend entirely on your own history, your story, everything that comes together to make up who you are. And because of this, 3 different people can experience the same piece of art and have wildly different reactions to it. One person might think it's the most beautiful thing they've ever seen, the second person might hate it, and the third might not feel much of anything at all. And none of them would be wrong. Everyone's entitled to their own preferences and feelings when it comes to art. You know, the way you feel about your favorite song could be the same way that someone else feels about their favorite sculpture. And even though you might not like that sculpture, it can be valuable to consider why that person enjoys it so much. You may learn something about them and maybe even yourself. The term art is really just a label. Over the years, a lot of people have tried to classify what it is or what it isn't, but that's not really what art is about. It's about your personal experience with it and the meaning that you draw from it. Everyone reacts to art differently and has the potential to grow and learn from it. It gives us the opportunity to tell stories, record history, and tap into our emotions in a way that few other things can.
Goodwill Community Foundation, creating opportunity.
All right. And so I love that what is art video, because it also can tie into like, what is a scientist? You know, we must reimagine what a scientist is. What is a mathematician? You know, what is an engineer, right? What is technology? You know, do we frame it in this, limited, maybe Eurocentric narrative, or an industrial revolutionary model, or capitalistic model? Or can it be, a revolutionary of ideas of people that we typically do not include, right? And I think that's something we must go back and say, what is STEM? What is science? What is technology? What is engineering? What is art? What is math, right? And look at there's many different ways of doing things. So I found this online, and it said the top 10 famous artists to teach preschoolers. I have a 4-year-old son. He just graduated from preschool. I'm very proud of him. But if his teacher was to adopt this model, there's only one woman on here, and it's Georgia O'Keeffe. She has a lot of work rooted in New Mexico. But pretty much everybody on this list, if I'm not mistaken, is a male and pretty much European. And so my son would never learn about Jean-Michel Basquiat, right? And other people of color that have done, great works. And so these are things we must consider as we're teaching these particular subjects. And M for mathematicians. I found this kid math game online, and I just typed in, kid games, for mathematicians or whatever, and this popped up. And as you can see, once again, some of the same people represented over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. You're always going to get Isaac Newton or Einstein or Copernicus, or you're going to get, what's his name? His name escapes me right now. But you're going to get these same Thomas Edison, you're going to get the same people, but they're rarely going to mention Lewis Lattimore or Lonnie Johnson or people that like that, you know what I mean? Jerry Lawson, wonderful people who've done great things, And so as you can look at the cover of the book, A Concise History of Mathematicians, there are no women, no people of color. So what are the images that our children are getting? What are the messages that pre-service teachers and employers are getting when they think about STEAM, right? And I can just look online and already see what's there. So my daughter, she's really into like creating right now. She has a very artistic frequency right now going on. And I'm always trying to introduce her to different people like Misty Copeland, the ballerina. and just have her to think things outside of the norm, right? And so these are just a few surface examples. I know when we wrote our curriculum for honors engineering, we never, well, they didn't, but I always included people of color, right? And I always try to make relationships with businesses and try to introduce them to my students, which are like 98% Hispanic, and trying to bridge that gap, that cultural that cultural chasm that was there, right? So how can we change this, right? How can we change the curriculum? So one of the ways I changed the curriculum was multicultural education I mentioned earlier. So I included all these heroes and sheroes that reflected my students' race, ethnicity, their religion, ability, disability, sexual orientation, class, languages, and citizenship, right? And so that makes them feel better, feel included. They get a sense of belonging. But it doesn't stop there, because I think if we stop there, we do the students a disservice, because we must remember that the children are going to go to college and graduate and go into the workforce. The workforce is the reality portion. When you're applying for jobs and you can't get hired, and you're applying for internships and you keep getting looked over, or you're in a particular class and you're trying to find a lab partner, but they don't want to choose you because they think you're there for affirmative action, that you're there to help to meet a quota. Those things have a psychological impact on you. You know what I mean? And so this is where I like to introduce critical multicultural education, in the sense of thinking about it beyond the scope of just representation. Representation is wonderful. So critical multicultural education theory provides a cultural framework and context for how uneven power relations are perpetuated at a structured institutional level. So if I look at the data, as I mentioned earlier, the Pew Research data, I want to know, why do the Black and brown employees, or Black and Hispanic or Latinx employees feel that way? Why do you feel that way, right? That's what critical multicultural education looks at. It looks at the why, right? And so I can introduce all of these different heroes and sheroes, but it doesn't get to the why and try to disrupt this systemic way of thinking. Critical multi-education is a transformative pedagogical framework that allows students to analyze and question social conventions that continue to benefit some groups at the expense of others, being by bringing varied experiences and voices to the center of student dialogue. So similar, when I type in scientists, or if I type in mathematicians or engineering, we can see that some groups are benefiting and others are not, right? Educational programs, pedagogical techniques, and social relations and democratic activity in schools are all bolstered by critical multicultural education, right? And so we're trying to promote democracy, right? We live in a democratic nation, but our hiring practices, our leadership in companies don't look democratic. They look like one particular group, right? And critical multi-education ultimate purpose to contribute to societal transformation, as well as the implementation and maintenance of social justice and equality. Critical multicultural education is seeking that there's an equal distribution of resources for everybody, not that one group is benefiting over another because they belong to a privileged group, being male, being Anglo-Saxon, being from a certain class, being that they're Protestant, being that they're able-bodied, being that they fit a certain age, being that they have a certain height. You know what I mean? Like, these are things that people are often grouped in, and because of that, they're benefited. Also, critical multicultural education brings attention to the oppression and injustice present within society's social structure. I taught 5 years at Metro Tech, Title I school. I never had a Black student in my class, and I taught honors engineering. Never. I had, and it was predominantly it's Hispanic school, but the Black students I would talk to, they were put on different tracks. They would be in automotive, they would be in construction. They had a few go into computers, but I never had one take honors engineering. And when I would talk to some of the Black students on campus and try to recruit them to my class, they always told me this thing over and over again: I'm not good at math. I'm not good at math. And that's not true. And I would explain to them some of the first mathematicians on this planet come from the continent of Africa. Have you not seen the pyramids, right? Have you not seen the pyramids which were built by Africans? And so this is a way I think that we could introduce critical multi-education. Like this is like a low-hanging fruit way of doing it. And so I'm looking at some science or scientists. And so this is a variation, right? Or diverse variation of what you can do if you're covering science. You can introduce a person, talk about their contributions, but also tell their background, right? And how they overcame. Don't just introduce them as two-dimensional. You know, Dr. Person Levon Julian figured out how to synthesize important medicinal compounds from abundant plant sources. But he also talked about his experience at Harvard University, and they wouldn't let him complete his degree. And talk about the impacts that he made by help synthesizing a particular compound in hydrocortisone that led to mass production. Talked about Dr. Charles Drew and what he did during World War II. He invented blood banks. He invented the process to get plasma out of blood. So every time you see a plasma donation center, you can thank it to Dr. Charles Drew, right? Talk about their history, right? And the things they had to overcome. If you want to look at technology, we have Jerry Lawson, Benjamin Banneker, Anna Ruque del Dupre, and Ruth Rogan Benarito. Anna Ruque de Dupre, she classified over 6,000 species of plants, trees in the island in the text Lo Botanica Antillana. It's considered one of the most important books in the Americas of the 20th century. I think she started teaching at the age of 14 years old. She was very young when she started teaching. And you can talk about the struggles that she had, right? And how she overcame and how she's important to the Latinx experience. Jerry Lawson, you know, for everyone that plays video games with exchangeable games, you can thank him. He invented the first video home game system with interchangeable games. It was called Channel F. Engineer, you can talk about Lonnie Johnson. He's the inventor of the Super Soaker. You can talk about Silverio Ochoa, won the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine. You can talk about Silvia Acevedo. The list goes on and on. These are people you can introduce into your curriculum, but talk about their backgrounds, right? And how they overcame, right? And tell students they weren't just successful, they changed the game, right? And that's being critical of looking at the systems that oppressed them and how they overcame. Arts, I mentioned earlier, Jean-Michel Basquiat, which is in the bottom left-hand corner. I love Frida, big fan of her work and her political involvement in the history of Mexico. Edmonio Lewis, I don't think we talk a lot about her. She was mixed with Native American and Black. And you just, you know, just talk about these things with your students. One of the things I want to highlight on this page for math is the Polynesian people. So, you know, I taught binary coding within my engineering class, but I didn't know this, but the natives of a remote Polynesian island invented a binary number system like the one used by computers to calculate centuries before Western mathematicians Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, right? And so for so long, we accredited binary counting or programming to Gottfried, when actually the Polynesian people had did it centuries before that. See, this is a way of being critical. It's to say, well, this person got credit, but actually the Polynesians did it. And you may have a student in your class who's Polynesian and say, oh, I didn't know we did that. And you changed their life just like that, right? And, or for students who are not Polynesian, it changes their perspectives on Polynesian people, right? And these are ways that we could do that by being critical. Okay, so these are some suggestive activities and readings for educators in schools. I say take the Harvard Implicit Association test. It's not perfect, but it'll help you with dealing with biases, and they have so many different tests. Gender, race, I think religion are a few. Learn about microaggressions and macroaggressions, Chester Pierce and Gerald Sue. Learn about funds of knowledge, Gonzalez, Mal, and Amentis. This framework actually comes out of the University of Arizona. Become familiar with culture relevant education, build relationships with local STEAM businesses, establish minoritized STEAM clubs, and invite guest speakers to your course or classroom, and research STEAM professors, in Maricopa, and build relationships. If you need help finding STEM instructors, please contact me. And so here's a couple of textbooks that I suggest you probably can look at to help in your classroom. They're great textbooks. I have one critique of this textbook in the upper left-hand corner. It's Black Pioneers of Science and Invention. It should say Black Male Pioneers, because they don't even mention any women at all. So that's my critique of that. But these are some textbooks that you can use in your classroom. And so what you're doing is you building the students not to be aware of their own culture, but they're also being critical and trying to find solutions for themselves to be able to critique the hiring practices and things of that nature, right? To be aware. I think one of the downsides of me graduating with my associate applied science in technology and engineering is when I got into the workforce, I was not aware of this discriminatory practices that were there. I wasn't aware, and I was like, man, I would love to teach a class on that. So my email address is at the top. That's the number to my desk. And that is the end of my presentation. I thank you so much for joining me today. And I look forward to the Q&A that's coming after this. All right, thank you so much. Bye.